First pitch swinging and launching deep to right. Carlos Cortez uncorks a bomb, and that is a 3-run shot that is absolutely tagged out of here. Gamecocks have broken it open. It is 9-2.
That's more like it. Derek Scott on the call last night right here on 107.5 The Game, the Gamecock IMG Sports Network. 10-2 the final score. That 3-run shot from Cortez, part of a 4-run 8th inning for the Gamecocks, breaking that thing open. It was a 2-2 ball game midway through, and it looked like it might be more of the same midweek struggles, Bill, that the Gamecocks had going in. A 5-6 record against in-state schools. But 17 hits is what the Gamecocks end up with. A bunch of guys with multi-hit ball games, including Carlos Cortez. 4 RBI on the game for him, 2 out of 5. He leads the way from an RBI perspective. From a hit perspective, it was Jonah Bride's 4 for 5 at the plate. And the Gamecocks go on to cruise. That's exactly what they needed, right?
Exactly what they needed. That is, when we talked about yesterday, going up there, taking advantage of an inferior opponent and playing like the better team and just eliminating that game, getting it out of the way, and going on to a very big series. Now, because it is strange. 7 days ago, I feel like we were going, all right, that was the end of the 2018 season. Thank you, everybody, for playing. Let's move on to 2019. What's next? What's next? And 7 days later, I feel like this baseball team all of a sudden off a massive sweep, off of a blowout victory. I know it was close there for multiple innings, I think until about the 6th or 7th. But all of a sudden it's a 10-2 win, and now you go on and look, this goes back to what you and I have said multiple times. Even though we've never once said this team will make the NCAA tournament, you and I have constantly sat here on several mornings and said the opportunities will be there if they can get hot. Because of the competition, because of the SEC, because of who they play, if they could get hot, they can recover from some really bad losses because of the quality of competition they'll play moving forward. That means, one, this weekend's going to be tough. It doesn't mean you can go up and just drop 2 or 3. You got to go win this next series. But all of a sudden, the whole dynamic of South Carolina baseball has changed now as we go into really the final weekend of April and the final 4 weeks of SEC play now. And last night I thought it was nice to win it. It was even better to go up there and kind of get a blowout win and take some of the pressure off in the late innings.
You couldn't ask for a much better performance. The freshman Carmen Majinski on the mound going 7 innings, giving up just 3 hits, 2 runs, striking out 7. Then Ridge Chapman, the former Sunday starter in SEC play, comes in, strikes out all 3 guys he faces. That's all he got. Corey Stone finished things out in the 9th inning from a pitching perspective. And again, I mentioned what Carlos Cortez did at the plate with 4 RBIs. Jonah Bride leading the way with 4 hits. At the top of the lineup, T.J. Hopkins has returned with a fury now. He was 3 for 5. Right behind him was Cortez. Madison Stokes hitting in the 3 spot, also hit a home run, had 2 RBIs as well. So the damage came from all over the lineup. Noah Campbell was at the bottom of the lineup, and he was 2 for 4 as well. Looks like he's worked his way out of a slump. And again, 17 hits for Carolina, 10-2 the final score. Now, number 11 Vandy comes up on the road this weekend. So we've seen the Gamecocks, I guess, take the next step with a big series win against a ranked opponent in LSU over the last weekend. That was at home. Doing it on the road this weekend would be that next step towards becoming a very serious NCAA tournament threat at this point of the year. Bill.
Yeah, I mean, again, what last night was nothing more than beating Furman, but the way this season has gone was actually a pretty big step. I mean, I hate to say that's where South Carolina baseball is right now, but they needed to get past that game. And you're right, now you get a very talented team in Vanderbilt, a team that has had quite a history all of a sudden over the last 7 or 8 years with South Carolina. I think you can make the case. Obviously, South Carolina, Florida played for the national championship, but you could make the case that over the last 7, 8 years, South Carolina Vanderbilt has been the rivalry of the SEC. Going back, I mean, we've seen at times some true bad blood between these two teams. Florida has won a championship. Vanderbilt's won a championship, but for a while there, when South Carolina and Vanderbilt hooked up, that was kind of the weekend series. That was the one that got everybody's attention. I think that's still there to a certain extent, maybe not with the heat that it had been in previous years, but a great opportunity. And if you're South Carolina, you're playing well, you're playing with confidence, and you go into a series that if you can find a way to get 2 of 3, all of a sudden, again, not only it continues to change the dynamic of what we've been discussing regarding Mark Kingston's baseball team.
17 hits last night in Greenville, a season high. And this was a game that was over late. It got pushed back to an 8:05 start because of the weather and clearly did not adversely affect the Gamecocks. Exactly what they needed. Majinski's 7 innings, tying a season high for Gamecock pitching, by the way. So it could not have gone or ended up a whole lot better. The Gamecocks now 4 games in a row, 4 wins in a row, headed into Nashville this weekend. We got the NFL draft coming up tomorrow as well. Actually, a little bit of Gamecock football news coming out. The Will Muschamp Spurs Up speaking tour continues, and that's where the news of a couple of transfers came out. A redshirt freshman defensive lineman, or I guess he was heading into his sophomore year and never really played on the field for the Gamecocks, and Aaron Thompson, and then junior defensive back Antoine Wilder would have been heading into, I think this time of year I never understand how they classify guys. So he would have been headed into his junior year. Is that the deal?
Redshirt junior year.
Okay. So he had 7 tackles in 8 games last year. So relatively minor stats, but a guy who had gotten on the field for the Gamecocks. Both of those guys, Aaron Thompson and Antoine Wilder, have decided to transfer from the program. Typical annual attrition, I think, in a football program where you have 85 scholarships. Much different than the transfer talk we have around the Gamecock basketball program this time of year.
Yeah, not a shock with Aaron Thompson, who had struggled a little bit to kind of just break into the rotation and had been injured a little bit and maybe wants to be a little bit closer to home and be a part of something different. Antoine Wilder,
Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, Antoine Wilder was a part of one of the Steve Spurrier classes, one of the final Steve Spurrier classes, and so he was a guy that at least he contributed, maybe a little bit more of a surprise. Not a huge. I mean, look, this is what's happening right now. South Carolina's having to upgrade the talent. There were some players better than Antoine Wilder that are now within the program and that could contribute this year, and that was probably going to limit his snaps and definitely cut down on how much he could be out there. So with that in mind, not really a surprise on him. He had missed the spring with an elbow injury and had not been able, or maybe a shoulder injury, had not been able to go through. So not a shocker. Maybe a little bit more surprised with Wilder just because, again, he had at least contributed a tad and seemed like a guy that maybe had an opportunity to get in there and fight for playing time come fall camp, but he'll go find a program, maybe Georgia State. Go back home. That's where he's from, Atlanta. Go play for Sean Elliott, a coach he knows, and might be a good fit there.
In the NBA, a couple of series closing out last night. Bills, Miami Heat done.
You know, I not happy about it, but I tell you what, those Philadelphia 76ers, as we kind of go through the playoffs, they have personality. I'm not going to bandwagon hop here. I feel like that's the thing for me to do. Mm-hmm. But watching them last night, because I thought the Sixers got to us a little bit. We got Goran Dragic slapping Ben Simmons in the back of the head at one point, and we were trying to rough up Embiid. So I didn't really care for the way we were playing. But those Sixers, that's the team I'm pulling for to get to the finals. They've got some flair to them. They got some really fun, young talent to them. I'd like to see them, and maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out who I want to come out of the West. Houston, maybe, or maybe get another Golden State. But, man, I like watching the Sixers. They're fun and entertaining, and if you don't like NBA basketball, maybe just check out the Sixers for a minute because they're actually pretty entertaining. I don't know how much you've gotten into watching them.
Absolutely, with Joel Embiid there, Ben Simmons, and then having one of the worst seasons in NBA history just a couple of years ago, and now being where they are. I think you feel the enthusiasm or the refound energy around Philadelphia basketball. It had struggled since basically the Allen Iverson era. Right. It had been a while for sure. 104-91, that final score. You mentioned Golden State. They also close out the San Antonio Spurs, 99-91. Both the Sixers and the Spurs end up winning their series 4-1. The other NBA game last night, it was a 2-2 series between Boston and Milwaukee until the Celtics get a 5-point win at home to go up 3-2 against the Greek Freak and company there. And Chris Middleton, the South Carolina native, leading the way, I think, for the Bucks last night, but not enough against the Celtics. Bill equating Gamecock baseball to Gamecock men's basketball this year just spawned the Frank's Discount Tire poll question at Tim Hill 1075, where you can go and vote. Which Gamecocks program will win an SEC championship first right now, moving forward? Football, baseball, men's basketball, or women's basketball? Bill, you just talking about it off air. This is a bit of a different question about which program do you feel better about, because that's a little bit different than winning an SEC championship, because which season was the best? Clearly, women's basketball would win that out, right? But you lose the National Player of the Year in Asia Wilson. You don't have an heir apparent necessarily in line. It's not like when Tiffany Mitchell won the SEC Player of the Year and you had Asia Wilson as a freshman kind of in the pipeline there, along with several other players, Elena Coates, Kayla Davis, Alicia Gray. All those were still coming through the program. You don't have that clear pipeline. In football, you're coming off a 9-4 season. Tremendous, and everything is pointing in the upward direction. Jake Bentley back for his junior year. Debo Samuel back as one of the most explosive players in college football. The defense was tremendously improved last year and has a bunch of players back. But you have Georgia, who just played for the national championship in your division. You got Alabama, who just won the national championship, also in your conference. You would have to beat both of those programs out to win an SEC championship.
Right.
Baseball, a big downturn here recently. Last week at this time, we're talking about struggling to finish 500 at 20-17, coming off a loss to Presbyterian. A 4-game win streak later, the Gamecocks are ranked in one poll in top 25, talking about a very much improved RPI up to 50 and the chance to make a run to the NCAA tournament. And who knows where Mark Kingston takes this program, a first-year coach. There are a lot of unknowns. In men's basketball, we're talking about a huge turnover since that Final Four run. 13 guys have exited the program since that Final Four run, including the latest in Rotfelder happening a little earlier this year. We saw a team that could compete with top 25 teams consistently in a run of 4 games. They went 2-2 this year, and they had beaten Georgia in the previous game going into that stretch. And then we saw a team that at times just seemed overmatched and couldn't find a point guard. So you have that moving forward, and you have the huge question marks of Chris Silva and Brian Bowen having declared for the NBA draft. We're expecting to see certainly Silva back. The Brian Bowen thing is a huge question mark, which I don't think anyone has a clear handle on the long-term future, if there is one, with him in the program. So that's where they all stand as I see them. How do you see this poll question setting up?
I'd vote men's basketball. And here's why. I think, let's go through them real quick. In football, trying to climb over Georgia and Alabama, I think South Carolina can do it, but that's really, really tough. Those are set in pro. I mean, especially Alabama. I mean, that's going to be difficult. Baseball is what I would have as second, because I think that Mark Kingston. I just want to see. I don't have enough intel yet on Mark Kingston's baseball team. We're talking right where this program is heading, basically through 40 games now, 41 games, I believe, something like that. So I want to see a little bit more from them, but I'd have baseball. I jumped to women's basketball. Here's the thing. I think, like you just said, women's basketball is a pretty stable sport because the girls that come to college have to stay 3 years. They can't be one-and-dones. Mississippi State looks better. I know people dislike them. Missouri looks better. Kentucky's a quality team. Tennessee is a very good team. There's a lot of competition in the SEC in women's basketball, and I think South Carolina is right there with those teams. Would you take Asia Wilson out, and I don't see the next rising star? It's hard for me to look at that women's basketball team and go, okay, they're going to be the dominant force in the SEC moving forward. So I think they're coming back to the pack significantly. The reason I would say men's basketball is because I think from year to year, and look at the SEC this year, look at the 2 teams that just were at the very top of the conference, Tennessee and Auburn. Where were they picked at the beginning of the year? Tennessee was, I think, 12th or 13th. Tennessee was below South Carolina. You can actually let's hypothetically say for a minute, Bowen comes back, Silva's back. If Minaya develops a little bit, Coatsar develops a little bit, if Cousinard and Moss can step in, if they can get a guy, like, you can't change a team, in my opinion, cannot change as drastically in any sport as basketball can from year to year. And I do think Frank Martin's got the ability to bring in players that can drastically change the basketball program from year 1 to year 2, if that makes sense. I mean, you could see if and this is again why I voted basketball, if Brian Bowen plays, if Chris Silva comes back, if Justin Minaya takes the step forward, if one of those guys steps up at guard and is able to perform, I don't know if they'd win the SEC championship. But again, look at Kentucky. and the way that Kentucky can completely change. Auburn is not the same team anymore with Mustafa Heron.
You don't have to look at other teams, man. Just look at the Gamecocks.
Well, but
Final Four, no postseason.
No, but my point on that is, like, you got to look around at the rest of the conference too, and the way the rest of the conference will change. The rest of the way the rest of the conference will change. I mean, that's the thing. Like, basketball to me is the sport right now in college athletics that you can have the biggest change. And look, it's going to be that way for the majority of the SEC outside of Kentucky. We know what Kentucky is going to be every year, but there's going to be a drastic change because Kentucky's going to flip over their roster. They just had the Jones kid, the big power forward, the 6'9" kid. He's transferring because he can't go to the NBA yet. He's a one-and-done player, but he can't go to the NBA because he knows he won't get drafted. But he can't stay at Kentucky because they got all these other freshmen coming in behind him, so he's got to transfer. He's going to leave. He's got to transfer. Like, that one and done didn't work for him. The one and done meant, all right, I get 1 year at Kentucky. I can't go get drafted now. Cal's got all these other 5-star freshmen coming in. I'm going to lose my spot, so I got to go to another program now. The basketball, and that's why I say it, I think.
So what I hear you saying is that as opposed to SEC football or SEC baseball or SEC women's basketball right now, you're saying SEC men's basketball is the easier path to a championship.
And I think you can flip that roster. Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's a more unstable team roster on that list right now than men's basketball. But I also think Frank Martin's a really good coach, and I think his ability to bring some players in. We're not just talking about this upcoming academic year. You said, and I do agree, you might have worded, you said first, and I saw where Lee Hogan hit you up and said,
he says first or next. Baseball and women's basketball already have won championships. We understand that. Yeah. So if I said first, if I said next, then don't I have to say next? Who does it next first?
Yeah,
that's just why I said first.
But I guess the point on that being is we're just talking about next. Like, let's say Frank Martin.
Who will win? This is probably how we should have phrased it. Who will win South Carolina's next SEC championship?
Yeah, let's say Jalik Felton does transfer home, and you add him, and the two guards, Moss and Cousinard, turn out to be good players, and Jawan Gary from right down the road, who I think South Carolina's in good shape, comes to South Carolina. If again, and these are a lot of ifs, but again, for any of the sports, you got to deal in the if factor. I just think that men's basketball right now, the way that not just the SEC is, but the way that sport is in general, that's the easiest sport to go from 1 year. I mean, look at Oklahoma is the perfect example. Oklahoma 3 years ago, was in the Final Four, got blown out by Villanova. Last year, or 2 years ago, Oklahoma did what South Carolina didn't make any kind of postseason. They got Trae Young this past season, and they're right back in the NCAA tournament. So do you see in a 3-year period, Oklahoma went Final Four, no postseason, get that guy, go back to the postseason. I think men's basketball, you can make the quickest transition. And again, there's no easier way to look. Tennessee was projected, I think, 12th or 13th this past year, and they're up there is right there competing for the league championship. So they lost to Auburn, but competing for the league championship. So to me, you can make a bigger move, whereas football, we know what Alabama's going to be for a long time until Nick Saban steps down. Baseball, there's a lot of competition. Look at the league this year. 10 different teams this year, and baseball is kind of that quirky sport, and I don't know if we know about Marquise right now. Women's basketball, because you come to college, you have to stay. The coaches, they're able to kind of build their rosters and know what they're dealing with. Mississippi State's going to continue to be good. I think Missouri is taking the South Carolina approach, and I think even though a lot of people don't like Missouri, they're going to continue to be good. Kentucky is generally good. Tennessee, you got some good programs there in the women's side of things, and I think with losing Asia Wilson, that one's going to back up a little bit to the pack.
Craig weighing in via the Shepherd's Glass inbox this morning. At Tim Hill 1075, at Will Gunter with 1L, says he feels the best about football a year ahead of Florida and Tennessee. If you can beat Georgia, you can hang with Alabama, the best staff that South Carolina has ever had. Again, the Frank's Discount Tire poll question. Interested in hearing your thoughts. At Tim Hill 1075, where you can officially go and vote. Right now, more than 50 votes in, just a few minutes into this poll question, and women's basketball is leading the way. The 4-time defending SEC tournament champions, women's basketball, with 44% of the vote. Football with 29% of the vote in second place. Baseball in third at 19% of the vote. And men's basketball last place right now, Bill, with 8% of the vote. Which Gamecock program will win an SEC championship first? The question came up because, Bill, you mentioned that this baseball team this year has reminded you a lot of the men's basketball team in being a bit uneven. competing with some of the best teams in the country, and yet losing some games where it makes you feel like they can't compete with the best teams in the country. And that's why we brought this up, and especially knowing where the football program is now, coming off the Outback Bowl win, having a bunch of guys back, and being picked, I think, as a sleeper, one of the sleepers in the SEC, kind of a sneaky type team that can end up winning more games than maybe most people expect. And then you also have Vegas. I saw at least one book has set the over-under for season wins. Did you see the number? 7 for the Gamecocks next year in the 12 regular season games. Thought that was awfully low, knowing that the Gamecocks won 8 last year and seem to be on an upward path, especially with the schedule they'll be facing. And then you got the women's basketball thing, where I know they won 4 straight SEC tournament championships. No, that has never been done, but they've also lost the National Player of the Year, and I think who we've said on this program, and it's pretty apparent when you're talking about resumes, probably the best athletic career in the history of the University of South Carolina, and Asia Wilson, now no longer part of the program. So let's get into it on the Love Chevrolet phone lines, 803-404-6100. Hank, you're up first. What do you think, Hank?
Hey, fellas, how's it going?
All right.
Hey, I think you would look at the football team having a chance, because this football team is, up there, and if you can just get past that one game, like Bill said, Alabama's a big deal. I think, I still stick with tried and true at be the women's basketball, because Missouri lost some players last year, so they do bring back the Cunningham girl, but they were kind of a team that, as they lost players at the end, they needed every single player they had to be competitive. That's why they always kind of bow early in the NCAAs. And Mississippi State lost, I think, 3 or 4 of their starters. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, the girls' basketball team has recruited number one in the conference until Tennessee had their big class, and Tennessee can't stay out of their way for some reason. So a lot of projections in magazines and things that cover girls basketball have USC and Mississippi State, Tennessee battling out for that SEC championship again, and with the amount of talented girls that are coming in, with the girls that are left that had to play this year, I think it's still the girls that have the best chance.
Okay, Hank, appreciate the phone call there. I think that's certainly the safest bet at this point. I understand why it's leading the way early on, but this is almost like investing at this point, right? We're not talking about. I know we're in the middle of baseball season, but I don't think anyone's going to argue that the Gamecocks are going to win the SEC championship this year in baseball. We're talking about what has the brightest future, right, or what's going to have the most immediate payoff. You can look at it that way as well. That's the interesting part of this conversation to me.
I'm going to make people yell at their radio and yell at me for doing a bad.
You say that like it's new?
Yeah, I know. It's like you watch, people are about to say that I'm awful at my job, more so than usual. I don't pay attention to the rest of recruiting in women's basketball. I have zero clue what Mississippi State or Missouri or Kentucky are bringing in. What I do know,
most people are nodding their heads now. I agree. That's where I come at.
Just making sure. People might say, "Well, it's your job. You better know that." How do you not know that? You should know the recruiting rankings.
There's a lot of that.
You're the recruiting nerd. You should know the recruiting rankings for women's basketball. Come on, Bill. What have you been doing?
You have dropped Destiny Henderson on us often on this program.
Okay, I know South Carolina, but I have no clue. Like I heard Hank say, I don't know what Mississippi State just graduated in women's basketball. I have no clue what Missouri Sophia Cunningham could be coming back. I have no clue. Here's what I do know.
I think she is.
The bottom line is, at the end of this year, for what it's worth, Mississippi State was 2, South Carolina was 6, Texas A&M was 11, Tennessee was 17, Georgia was 19, Missouri was 22. There's a lot of good women's basketball teams, and that was the ESPN USA Today final rankings for women's basketball. Final rankings.
Can you do it one more time?
Mississippi State at 2, South Carolina at 6,
okay,
Texas A&M at 11, Tennessee at 17, Georgia at 19, Missouri at 22.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because the league is getting better. The league itself is improving, I think, and is getting better. And I think until we see – I know Taya Cooper will finally be eligible next year, and you'll have the Destiny Henderson and Ty Harris will be back, and we'll see if some of the big girls can continue to improve. It's going to be a different dynamic with Asia Wilson. I think the league is improving. Football, it's just, I think in terms of programs right now with the most upward momentum, I think the program you'd be maybe most excited would be football. I think that they have the highest trajectory right now. They are heading in the right direction and in the fastest pace. But, man, you know how tough it is to win. So Alabama wins a national championship this year and couldn't win the SEC championship. Like, that's just where we're at with the SEC. It's hard for me to say that football team is going to win to win an SEC championship and that they're going to be the next to do it. Baseball, I just don't have enough on Mark Kingston and what this baseball team is going to be. To me, again, the way Frank Martin can run that program and make changes and the way you can change your basketball program, and also my belief that they're going to end up getting Jalik Felton, that I think they'll get Jawan Gary, that I do think that they'll enhance the roster, that I think Frank Martin's going to make some changes to how he recruits and some guys, and I think that this will be kind of a year that Frank Martin really adjusts a few things. And the way that sport is played with massive transition, not just for South Carolina, but throughout the conference and throughout the nation. I think
Tennessee and Auburn this
year.
Exactly.
I think that actually sets up as the best possible chance to win an SEC championship.
Now, we should clarify as well, because when we say who will win the next SEC championship, in football and in baseball, I guess it's still split up in divisions. Basketball no longer has divisions. We're not talking about an SEC East Division title, though. We're talking about SEC championship, and to me, that can be a regular season or a tournament deal when it comes to basketball.
And you can
you agree with me? You with me? You agree with me on this?
Say that again.
In our definition, it can be either the regular season, for instance,
or the tournament.
Auburn and Tennessee get credit for an SEC championship this year, to me, in basketball, because they tied for it in the regular season.
Yeah.
So you're with me?
Okay.
So regular season or the SEC basketball tournament.
And I will say this: I think you put it in that scenario where it's a one-game situation. I think the women's team, just like this year, I wouldn't have given them much of a chance going in. I knew they could do it, but the way things were kind of evolving for them down the stretch, and with Asia Wilson having vertigo, going up to Nashville and everything.
Sure.
But they go and they win it.
And you agree that they get the title of SEC champions this year.
Yes,
right?
sure.
Because that's how basketball does it.
Tournament champion, yes.
So you give dual credit in basketball, not in baseball, though, because no one cares about the baseball tournament when it comes to a conference deal.
But the same thing, there's a conference tournament. There's a conference.
Yeah, but baseball is set up different because you have to set up your pitching staff. It's a different deal. You don't waste your resources. Who won the SEC championship last year in baseball?
I have zero clue, but I'll be dead honest. If South Carolina had not won it in women's basketball this year, I wouldn't know either. And that happened 2 months ago.
Okay. I'm pretty sure LSU won it last year because they ran to the game.
Let's be honest. How many of us would really, if South Carolina women's team didn't win it this year, how many of us would really know who won the SEC women's basketball championship this year?
Good point. But I think you have to give a basketball team more credit than you do the baseball team when it comes to a tournament championship.
It's a tournament. It's a championship. I think you go championship. But the bottom line here,
no.
And I'll say
what
this:
do you think you go championship?
Regular season.
You're just saying regular season,
full body of work. Yeah.
Okay, how does that work in football?
The way football to me, you go play the one game, and that defines the. So I'm with you on that. The way football is different than the other three, in my opinion.
So you're saying in basketball or baseball, it has to be a regular season championship, and in football that you have to win the championship.
Because I feel more like going to Atlanta is tied into the regular season than going and starting almost a whole new season, be it in Hoover, be it in Nashville, be it wherever. But If you're adding the tournament championship, I'd probably throw the women in there because I do think they are more competitive and have a better chance. I just think what I'm really basing this more on is not so much the programs, it's which sport I think is easier. And I almost am doing this with the exception of Alabama in football and a few other teams in particular sports. I think you're almost basing this more on the way that particular sport is played and organized. And so I think that's what kind of changes things a little bit.
Well, that's our opinions. Let's hear some of yours. Maybe our two most expert callers. I mean, we do it every week, every Friday during football season. They give the weekend pick, so we might as well hear from both of them at the same time right now. I'm guessing very dissimilar opinions about this poll question. Clemson Sean and Gamecock Larry just happened to be joining us at the same time. You guys didn't plan this. Is that correct, gentlemen?
No, I thought
perfect.
I thought Gamecock Larry was still asleep.
He is.
Okay, Clemson Sean, I'm gonna be down there next week. I'm gonna get a hold of you.
I love it. I love it. All right, Clemson Sean, you've been on hold a little bit longer, so we'll let you go first. Gamecock Larry, feel free to chime in and shut him up at any point where you're disagreeing with him.
I mean, I keep hearing this common mantra of people saying, look, if we can get past Georgia, we've got a great chance to win the East. Look, Kirby Smart had a really good football team last year. He had a football team rich, full of seniors, but he's only proven it for 1 year. I personally am not sold on Kirby Smart. I think the team that South Carolina has to worry about is Florida. Florida always has talent, and now they have probably the most proven head coach in the SEC East. He is a fantastic quarterbacks coach. He's coached Alex Smith, Tim Tebow, Dax Prescott. I mean, the guy's a quarterback guru. In my opinion, Dan Mullen will be the coach to win the East next year.
Wow. Okay. Clemson Sean, the hot take of the day, that watch out for Florida winning the East next year. Gamecock Larry, how do you see this poll question? Which Gamecock sport, football, men's basketball, women's basketball, or baseball, will win the next SEC championship for the Gamecocks?
Believe it or not, old Gamecock Larry going to agree with Clemson Sean because I back Kirby Smart. I do not think Kirby Smart is the coach. Last year he had richest players, and he got some good. He got a good recruiting class coming in. That I ain't sold on him as a. I don't know how to say, but that's okay. I agree with Clemson Sean on Smart, but I think the baseball team has got the best chance of winning the next SEC championship. They got a lot of freshmen freshman pitchers on the team, and if all the players come back, well, if all of them come back, you can come back. We can go to Omaha next year. Go Gamecocks, and I'll see you, Clemson Sean. I'll be in Columbus this weekend. I'll call you Monday morning.
Excellent. Gamecock Larry, ladies and gentlemen. What I get from both of those expert opinions is that Kirby Smart should feel very secure about his future moving forward. What do you guys want from a coach, man? They were one ridiculous pass away in overtime from winning a national championship.
What I took away from it is Gamecock Larry summed up my radio life in one sentence. I don't know how to say it, but that's okay.
I'm going to win.
Yeah, Mark Rick, Kirby Smart, not at the top of Clemson Sean.
You want better recruiting classes since he's been there? They're like at the top of the country. A lot of reaction to me, the Shepherd's Glass inbox. A lot of the words coming from one source. Thomas hitting us up on the Shepherd's Glass inbox about today's Frank's Discount Tire poll question. Which Gamecock sport will win the next SEC championship for USC?
Breaks it down very eloquently. Poll answer, he says, easily, women's basketball. Then I get a diatribe. We're not winning a conference title in football. Haven't come close to one in 25 years. No reason to think that program will be the one.
So playing in Atlanta wasn't close in 2010?
I'm just reading you what he said.
Okay.
So you're gonna
answer.
You're gonna refute every one. So should I read it and then pause? All right.
That's okay. I'll just break right in.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Men's basketball, very slim chance in basketball. If we get hot in SEC tournament until we stop having massive yearly turnover, I don't see them being a strong bet. Maybe next year it could be Mania Cudd and a couple of those recruits.
Does he not see Kentucky every year with massive turnover in college basketball? Please continue.
Baseball just isn't very good, and Kingston wasn't running through conferences at Illinois State or USF. 2 years' worth of conference titles in 8 years, and you've got a minor league team in Gainesville that isn't going to stop rolling.
Okay, I think that's almost a slight to Florida's baseball program. They could whip a lot of minor league teams, I think.
Finally, he says, we know that Staley has had major success in recruiting, the transfer market, and on the floor. She may have a down year or two, but she's proven her program will be in the discussion most years. Can't say that about any of the other three.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of Thomas's assessments there?
I don't necessarily agree with the reasons why he's saying football, men's basketball, and baseball won't do it, but I do agree with what he says about Dawn Staley and why he would vote for them. How it's kind of one of those things where the equation of the problem works out, but the math to get there,
right?
I would do that a lot when I had to get because I still.
But this
think,
is investing in like Apple now, right? Something that's already proven,
right?
And you'd have to buy very high. I mean, they're 4-time defending SEC tournament champions, as opposed to the success in other sports not nearly the same. I understand you would probably take baseball out of that equation, being the back-to-back national champs just several years ago and a third straight appearance in the national championship series. But you're now on 2 coaches later, and a first-year coach in a program that has struggled largely this season, and there's not near the confidence or a proven production in the program at this point that was just several years ago with Ray Tanner. Now, this has caused some people to give us some write-in votes this morning via the Shepherd's Glass inbox. Chris going with equestrian team for sure. Brian going with softball. Now, softball is having a heck of a season, but before last weekend series, I believe they were just one game above 500 in conference play. They were 8-7, and then they got a weekend sweep, and now they're 11-7, I think, in conference play right now. If you really want to get into it, I think SEC softball is pretty ridiculously dominating compared to the rest of the country.
Yeah, and again, the reasoning. I think my reasoning for choosing men's basketball has less to do with where the program is at, or it could be more to do with how quickly you can transition a basketball team from good to kind of bad back to good. And again, I know South Carolina is the easy example, but if for those out there that say, well, that's an anomaly, Oklahoma is another great example. Look at what Oklahoma did. 3 years ago, they were in the Final Four. Went all the way to the Final Four, got blistered in that Final Four game by Villanova, if anybody remembers that. 2 years ago, completely missed both the NCAA and the NIT. Oklahoma didn't go anywhere. Last year, they get a player like Trae Young. I'm not saying South Carolina's got that guy coming in, but I'm just saying you get a guy like Trae Young, you have some pieces around him, right back in the NCAA tournament.
And yet still, Kansas seemingly always is going to win the Big 12 championship.
Good thing about it. But the point being is you see how quickly your fortunes can change on a year-in, year-out basis in basketball. And I think that's part of the reason, because I do think if you get if, and I understand that saying, but if Bowen and Silva comes back, if the recruits are pretty good, South Carolina will be in play for it next year because of the transition of college basketball.
Dakota says football will win the next SEC championship at South Carolina, and that will come in 2018.